Here's 5 wide receivers I'm looking to bench here heading into week 13. The first guy's Jeudy of the Denver Broncos. Jeudy, the last few weeks now, the numbers have gone down after he had some decent ball games in the middle weeks of week 8 and 9. But Jeudy now, he's banged up with the ankle as well. He had no fantasy points in week 12 after that nightmare ball game where Kendall Hinton, the wide receiver, had to play quarterback for the Broncos, and they only ran Wildcat. But Jeudy, like I said, he hasn't had a big game since week 9. Week 10, he had 10.8 fantasy points with 4 catches and 68 yards. And then versus Miami in week 11, 3 catches, 37 yards. And now this week in week 13, he's banged up. Drew Lock, he should be back in this ball game though, but he's got a tough matchup versus the Kansas City Chiefs that don't give up the third least amount of fantasy points to wide receivers. And Jeudy, he's inconsistent, but that comes with being a rookie in this league, and I just don't think he's going to have a good ball game this week. So he's the first wide receiver I'm going to bench. The second guy I'm benching is Travis Fulgham of the Philadelphia Eagles. Fulgham was a guy set to drop a few weeks ago, and he's done nothing now for this Eagle team. This Eagle team's struggling. They got a tough matchup versus Seattle defense that's really starting to get it going. And Carson Wentz, he just can't get anything going with anybody, it seems like. And Fulgham, he had a monster 6 weeks coming out of nowhere, but I think defenses have adjusted. Wentz, he's been horrible as well. He's still owned in 63% of leagues. He should be dropped in more because his last 3 ball games have been a joke for Fulgham. He's combined only for 8 fantasy points in those 3 games. Week 10 versus the Giants, 1 catch for 8 yards. At Cleveland in week 11, 1 catch, 8 yards again. And then on Monday night versus Seattle, 2 catches, 16 yards. So that's not getting the job done. Now he's got a tough matchup versus Green Bay, versus probably Jair Alexander, I'm assuming, is going to cover Travis Fulgham, and he's one of the better corners in the league this year. So right here, Fulgham, you should drop him, and you should bench him as well. So he's the second wide receiver I'm benching. The third guy is Jamison Crowder of the New York Jets. Crowder, he's still owned in a bunch of fantasy leagues, 75%, and he's not getting the job done there. He's like the third wheel in that offense is Crowder. His last 2 ball games now, 2.60 and 6.10 last week versus Miami. This week he versus the Raiders, which their defense ain't that great, but Sam Darnold, he's not consistent. The only consistent jet receiver over there is pretty much Rashad Perriman, because he's a deep threat and he's a veteran, and Denzel Mims getting work. But Crowder, it's just been a lost season for him for the most part. He was injured in weeks 2 or 3, then he got hurt again in weeks 7 and 8. And he's only had 1 huge ball game this season, is Crowder. So he's a guy, I just don't trust his offense, and I don't trust his quarterback, so I'm benching him. The fourth guy, Jacobi Meyers of the New England Patriots, another guy with quarterback issues, and it's his quarterback more than him that I can't trust. And this week he's versing the Chargers, which it's going to be a decent matchup. I think he can make some plays, but I don't know if he's going to do that good of a job. It's Myers, and last week, well, I thought he would have a plus matchup versus Arizona. He had a mediocre ball game. Like I said, 5 catches for 52 yards, and I could see more of the same this week versus the Chargers, who give up the 7th least amount of fantasy points to wide receivers. So Myers, I just don't think it'll be a great game for him, and there's better options you're going to have on your club. And the 5th and final guy is Jarvis Landry of the Cleveland Browns. Last week, I think it was just a fluky ball game where he had an amazing matchup and finally took advantage of it. That was his first double-digit fantasy game for Landry since week 5, and he exploded. I'll give him that with a 27-point fantasy day. 8 catches, 143 yards, and a touchdown, but that's not going to happen again. He was benched in many leagues, and he was also only 77% owned. This week, I know on paper it looks like a good matchup, but I just can't trust Baker getting the ball to Landry, any consistency. So that's 5 wide receivers I'm benching here heading into week 13.